Cam Wilson, it's been too long.
It's good to be back.
And it's just you and me. So not only are you going to be promoting your own pet interests and your own
Grievances.
book, which we're going to talk about, grievances, peccadillos, you are also going to have to carry the load of Postle. I think this is the first episode that's ever been done that doesn't have Raph on it.
Wow.
So you're going, and you listen to the podcast.
I do.
So you know the sort of general vibe and contribution he brings.
I know the space I have to fill.
So the people will be expecting you to bring a little bit of that. So,
I think I can bring something different. And I was reflecting on last time I was on, and I started off by saying that it was like a fuck a fan contest, which was not a great way to start it, or this one either. And I want to reframe that as I've actually decided that I'm the voice of the audience, a sort of like an ombuds person, and I intend to. I actually have some feedback, which is I like some of the noises that you do. Like I like the beers opening. I even don't mind the tapping on the table. But James, this is directed at you. You got to cut out the sighs, man. They're not.
Sighs? Do I sigh?
You sigh. You're a sigh. I'm a sigh. I'm a terrible sigher. But you.
What kind of sighs? What am I doing?
It's like
sighs. What? I do some. Okay.
Yeah, but like it
it's
might
actually true.
Yeah, I'm a terrible for some reason I just instinctively love holding my breath. It's kind of like grating, like grinding your teeth, which is actually okay. Well, the MSN says you're not supposed to do it, but it feels so good. So
it feels good, and if you've got a bit of tension, go in. Why not do it by grinding your teeth?
Exactly.
One of the very very few parts of your body that doesn't restore itself in any way.
Absolutely, and the same with sighing. Sometimes I can feel it. I don't think it's a sigh of exasperation. But people might not be as generous as I am. So just,
that's
keep
true,
that in mind.
Actually, I've never picked up on it while editing, and I do get quite angry at someone when I scratch my beard. I do that a bit.
I don't mind. It sounds pensive in a way.
It is. Okay. Well, no more feedback for the rest of the episode. Thank you, Cam. Thank you, Cam Wilson. All right, so we did bring Cam on, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, a little while ago to talk about Australia's age verification laws, the ban on under 16s on social media, which we may loop back around to towards the end of our chat today. But we are talking to Cam for something more jubilant. He's a published author. And in the age of video, the age of short-form video, you are demanding of your audience to sit down and read what seems like, I haven't read it, I'm going to be really clear, I bought it yesterday while I was at Cam's book launch, which was a wonderful event. About 200 pages, I'm going to say 250 pages.
320.
300.
Yeah.
320.
All right. In the age of short video, we've gone long on text, so I guess we'll see if this pays off.
That's crazy. And it actually shows a level of disrespect towards the audience that you're covering, who are big fans of watching long, strange videos, I would argue. Anyway, so Cam has written a book that is called Conspiracy Nation. He wrote it with Ariel Bogle, also a former Down Round guest. I'm going to read the description from Ultimo Press, which published it. Through new investigations and first-hand accounts, Conspiracy Nation takes readers to the rallies, homes, courtrooms, secret chat rooms, and $2,000 Byron Bay luxury retreats for Australia's conspiracy theories spread. So yes, it's a book about conspiracy theories, and Cam, being a tech reporter, has good insight into sort of the technological dimension, the social media dimension of conspiracy. So, we're giving him an opportunity to promote his book and talk about something that we've touched on in Down Around from time to time, normally in an angular way. We haven't dedicated an entire episode to it, but Cam, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. What an introduction. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm a tech reporter, and then I started to get a little bit into kind of conspiracy theory reporting before the pandemic, and then obviously that made everyone pay attention to that stuff.
The Super Bowl of conspiracy reporting.
But I'm lucky that I can say that I did a little bit before, so I've got a bit of a hipster. No, I was into anti-vaccine stuff before everyone else was.
Yeah. I was actually into crazy people with no connection to reality a little bit before you were exposed to them.
Yeah, and it's it's so funny, this, like one of the honestly, one of the big reasons you wrote it is because people are often quite like their intuition about conspiracy theory stuff is often not right. And one of the big ones around technology is tech reporters is like everyone just assumes that more people believe in conspiracy theories now, and everyone just kind of assumes because of like it's linked to social media, Facebook, what have you. But it's actually not really the case. Like, it's very hard to tell, but based on actual research, like there's actually nothing that suggests that we now believe more in conspiracy theories than we ever did before. It's not like Facebook just like melted our brains. And that's because like, if you think about it, like, it's not like, what was that tweet about the like Canva product managers doing ayahuasca and being like one-shotted by it and then becoming like going off the reservation. It's not like, it's not.
Oh yeah.
It's not like that. It's if you think like that's what they would call like germ theory. This idea that like you're scrolling through your feed, you kind of get like, you see one conspiracy theory, like there in your feed, and then that just like instantly like converts you. Because the reality is like actually in a way that's never been before possible. Like you have more authoritative information at your fingertips than ever before. And often like despite all the quite like legit consternation about, like these communities are organizing online, they can connect in a way that's never possible, which is totally true. But also like if you look something up, the vast majority of the time you're actually being sent towards an authoritative source. So like if you Google something, most of the time you're being sent to like on a health thing, on a science thing. Most of the time you're being sent to like a government website. So like kind of counterintuitively, actually, like there actually might be some evidence that people believe in conspiracy theories less because of technology. Because think about it, like it used to be like, you'd be in a bar and someone would sidle up to you and they'd be like, "Let me tell you about who killed Farlow."
9/11.
Or 9/11 or Harold Holt or whatever. And you'd be like, that guy's like, that girl, I guess, is like, I guess I take their word for it. But now you just like whip out your phone and you say, that's not right. And so there's actually like, it was one of the reasons that we kind of wanted to write it. Because it's like people just assume because we see them more often, like they're in the streets during the pandemic, they're in our feeds. They're definitely more visible. And in some ways they're more organized and like connected. But it's not quite like, it's not quite the emergency in some ways, at least parts of it that like you might believe if you just kind of like see what people have written about it in the past.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably intuitively right. I mean, I do remember when at least like the technological side of conspiracy theory stuff before it became a conversation that was really bound up in social media, which it is now. I mean, obviously, anytime anyone's talking about the online distribution of conspiracy, you're normally talking about people who have gone off the rails. Like they've gone down a YouTube rabbit hole. They have been exposed to like some weird Instagram pages. They've ended up in these like closed up Facebook groups where people ping pong weird ideas back and forth from each other. They're organizing and I'm sure we'll get into all this sort of stuff. But before that, it was often the case that like the conspiracy side of the internet was like relatively segmented. There were forums, there were weird, deep areas that like, I used to read for fun when I was, back in like in the early 2000s and like late 90s, early 2000s, whatever, where like you'd read dedicated strange forums where people would spread information. But it was still like the internet mostly then was segmented communities.
Contained.
Plus like your big mainstream internet platforms, which are usually like mainstream media or the new web portals or whatever. But it was really, when the newsfeed emerged and all of a sudden, one of the, at least in my view, one of the classic, big bang moments was when everyone migrated to 5 different major platforms. They had a number of different coexisting communities. And all of a sudden, you were exposed to this stuff in your regular newsfeed. Right? Like you would see weird memes on the Facebook newsfeed because your friends were liking and sharing and whatever. And then like, that to me, that sort of set the stage when the pandemic rolled through. And then all of a sudden everyone was exposed, because you were sitting at home and looking at crap all day.
Yeah, and it's like a salience thing as well, right? Like one of the reasons we all started noticing it during COVID is because if you were anti-vaccine before then, I mean, like, again, Facebook kind of made it a way to express yourself, maybe conversations you might mention to someone, but you might then be posting about it. But even still, like, it didn't really come up a lot of the time. And so, suddenly during COVID, everyone's thinking about it, everyone's talking about it. And so, like, there's no denying that, like, many people became very, like, more outward about it. I think, like, I don't have any hard evidence to say that, but I think that's pretty clear because it became the top issue that everyone was thinking about. It became a mainstream political issue. But that doesn't mean that more people believing in it. And yeah, I mean, I think this is totally off the book, but like, I guess not really in a way. Like, the thing that I just am always, Mark Zuckerberg is such a robot of a person. Like, it's just not surprising that a total weirdo designed this form of internet and communication where, like, do you remember by like default, all of your, like, you'd write on each other's Facebook walls. Everything was kind of in the open. All your friends are visible, all your likes were visible. And this was like, you can see the intellectual like idea behind it. But it's totally the opposite of way humans have actually communicated, let alone the fact of the scale of, having hundreds of thousands of friends and then also being connected with everyone else. It's bizarre. And so you're totally right. We all get mashed into the same melting pot. And then the most emotive stuff, no wonder, like, rose to the top. So, your uncle, rather than telling you at a family dinner that he, believes that Port Arthur was set up, now it's him posting about it on Facebook, and then other people commenting on it, and then it being surfaced in everyone's feeds. So, part of it is about perception, but we also don't want to downplay the fact that, like, the internet allowed people in a way to connect with others based on interest, not limited by geography. And that's allowed people to, like, sometimes very good things, but obviously with conspiracy theories, it's probably not a good idea if you get a bunch of people with cooked ideas, like, all telling each other, no, mate, you're absolutely spot on. Like, keep going, you're cooking. And so what we've seen is, like, not only they've been able to organize in a way they haven't been able to before, they've been connected, and you've kind of got this, like, I think QAnon is a great example of this, which is, like, people know it's Donald Trump is the kind of, God savior, and this is pedophile, Democrat politicians who are evil. But it's a kind of like the thing that was so interesting about it is that it was this constant. It was, the community around it was so good at, like, turning every news event into more proof that, like, QAnon was real. Like, that's what kind of, like, all conspiracies have come. And conspiracy communities have become. You're not in your own little, like, hey, I'm a 9/11 truther. Hey, I'm a Harold Holt truther. You're all in the same communities, and you're saying, hey, if you don't trust the government on this, you don't trust them on this. And I think, like, that, has probably had a really negative effect too, because, like, maybe you have one bizarre belief, but then other people encourage it and tell you to get into more. That's kind of how you end up at the point where these things become actually really damaging to your life.
Yeah, and there's also, to me, I think one of the things, and this kind of speaks to the idea of this massive connected community where people can ping pong ideas and start building transnational theories about how everything works. Because, like, as I'm, again, remember, folks, I have not read the book. I'm speculating on what may be in the book. But I'm like, conspiracies are the idea that, there's a secret machinery behind the world and, like, things are happening behind the curtain that you and I are not privy to, but are, like, making our lives worse and we don't have control over and whatever. That's a very general characterization of what a conspiracy is, but I think that's kind of like the vibe. These are not new, and people have been believing various versions of, like, pattern matched weird belief for, I'm sure, classic Down Around thesis since we rose our head above the long grass on the Serengeti and became bipedal creatures. I'm sure there was some sort of conspiracy about the enemy tribe formulating. But also, one thing that I think technology has done, at least modern communication technology, and I'm sure the printing press did it to a certain extent as well, is just, like, give people a common language or structure for how they think about this stuff. And all the pieces fit together, There's been conspiracies about international bankers there's been centuries of that sort of stuff. But one thing I think is really interesting, and this is, like, one of my favorite old essays, and you may be familiar with it, is, like, The Paranoid Style in American Politics by Richard Hofstadter, which is, like, an essay that I love that's from the 60s. And it's basically this historian being like, there's a weird style in American politics that's, I think, unique to us, which is paranoid and strange, and it's not really about the content and what they believe. It's, like, the mode and the format. And he's like, I find it quite alarming. I'll just quote from it. I call it the paranoid style because no other word adequately evokes a sense of heated exaggeration, suspiciousness, and conspiratorial fantasy that I have in mind. Like this idea that there's a language of how American politics is done that it's weird. And I think that, like, this is just one of my grand theses, is that, like, the internet has just exported that format in a really clear way. And, like, even when Australians don't have the exact same theories as Americans, they're using that same sort of, like, super text. Everything's become a bit American. And it happens, like, even in non-conspiratorial American politics gets exported everywhere in weird little formats because they are the dominant force on the English language internet. That's just one of my little theses.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, I mean, like the globalization of everything, right? And the role that tech has played in it. The one of the chapters in the book is I looked into the origins or one of the main characters who spread Port Arthur conspiracy theories. This bloke, Joe Viles, he was kind of a no one in suburban Perth from his little home office, an early work from home guy. He was like an early adopter of the internet, and he was just popping off on these like long screeds and blogs and stuff. That seems very familiar now, but like, you know, back then that was kind of new. You had this like incredible like cyan background GeoCities-esque website. But so that really started to take off in the early 2000s. Port Arthur happened in 1996, and we noticed this in this mirrored like US conspiracy theories around mass shootings as well. This idea, you know, just that it was a false flag, that it didn't happen in some way. They started taking off in around the early 2000s when people were getting internet at home, so suddenly they could disseminate information in a way never possible. But then really took off, for example, when YouTube started. YouTube was a really big early spreader of Port Arthur conspiracy theories, and now, like, despite being 25 years ago, there are like Facebook groups still with tens of thousands of people. But the international influence of that is like, I guess it's probably hard to conceptualize it another way, but like, you know, YouTube, the idea of anyone being able to put out video, whatever they want, and particularly back then when Silicon Valley was very much in its early days of like free speech has no limits, we'll do whatever. Like that allowed these things to spread in a way that was never possible before, and obviously like all of culture to kind of, you know, go in the same melting pot, but definitely with this stuff. But also, like, you know, our book looked very much at like the Australian influence of Australian conspiracy theories, and like things about how, like, you know, like anti-vaccine stuff is massive in Australia. Sovereign citizen or as it's called, pseudo law stuff is really big in Australia. And that's partly because of the things like, you know, like in Australia we really value, like, nature is a big part of our national identity. You know, we love the beach, we love the bush. And if you think about it, like, vaccines are like, when you think about them in this conspiratorial or even not conspiratorial, but like, you know, sensationalist context, they're these kinds of, you know, foreign bodies going into your body. And it's the idea of unnatural versus like natural immunity. And so it's not really a surprise that Australians really punch above their weight internationally of being like anti-vaxxers and have been like some of the biggest, where they're among some of the biggest global influences on anti-vaccine stuff. So it's really a bit of everything. But I mean, like, just kind of like, and maybe there's a jump onto some of the other stuff of conspiracy theories, but like there's also just this thing of, and you touched on this before, that like, like how people learn about this stuff. There's like some researchers kind of say that the internet took over from like word of mouth and you know, pamphlets and zines and stuff, and that doesn't necessarily mean that, again, that's worse. It just swallowed, you know, it disrupted those, I guess you could say. But there is just like something to be said about the fact that there is just a part of the population who, you know, is on the kind of end of the spectrum where they're susceptible to these things. And it's like, I think I see a lot of parallels at the moment with this like AI chatbot stuff. I remember like the episode I think you did last year with Tom Cashman, where you were talking about like AI girlfriends, etc. And I was just like listening, being I look, you know, one of my theories is that like people like to fuck, and like I'm like I know there'll always be kind of weirdos who kind of get into the stuff.
I disagree. So we can say that for another episode, but I think that's not true. Actually, 5% of the population max are into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and they are not welcome here.
No, not on this podcast.
And so it's like just the desire for physical interaction, despite how good you know, bots will ever be, we're never going to be like, you know, 30-40% of the population loves robots or whatever. But I do think that like there's this weird balance, and this is often the way with like the scale of technology is that, and this kind of gets it with the conspiracy theories being able to, even if more people aren't believing them, still the scale being able to reach so many people is like, if a small amount of people, like a small proportion of any population believes in something or is susceptible to weird behaviors, and you can reach people at massive levels. And if you're suddenly, teaching search engines that we've all that many of us are now being raised on and are now like super dependent on, but now you're also making it say that, you're fucking sick and I love you.
Yeah.
It's super concerning. Like I just see a lot of parallels in the way that we're seeing, like, I actually am now it
positive
is
feedback.
Concerning.
People love seeing themselves reflected back, and they love positive feedback for whatever their weird little beliefs. I mean, there's a post that I always remember. I've only ever seen it via screenshots, but it's a classic thing where it's like a screenshot of like a 4chan green text thing. But it's the classic thing of like 30 years ago, if you said that you liked fucking toasters, everyone in your life would say to you, "That's really strange," and I would strongly encourage you not to do that. But now you can find a community of thousands, tens of thousands of people who will say, "Brother, I like that too." Which
here's my recommendation.
Which was not impossible in the old days. Obviously, there were many communities around that sort of thing, and they had mailing lists, and they had meetups, and they had whatever. But it's much more frictionless to find people that have your own particular fascinations. And then, again, coming back to that thing of online networks just mean you can scale anything. You can scale anything from like a belief through to a SaaS startup. There's some down round anchorage for our, it's the same thing, same logic. How do you scale? And similar techniques, I would say.
I would assume so. Yeah, and I think, again, with this like AI companionship stuff, now just thinking about the way that, the internet meant that you could connect with people and they would give you that kind of affirmation in a way that wasn't possible before. But now you can just substitute the community for just like, the dick sucking robot. That's it.
Exactly. The mirror. I mean, actually, it's a really good example of this happening right now in terms of like online conspiracy stuff and like the current conversation, and it has a real parallel with the Facebook conspiracy, Facebook filter bubbles. What are we doing about people getting stuck in these sort of like doom loops of weird antisocial beliefs or whatever it was. But we're seeing it right now with everyone talking about, and there's tons of feature stories we talked about a bit on down around like this kind of like ChatGPT psychosis stuff, and people trying to separate this idea of, on the one, like you've got ones that like we were just talking about companionship. People are falling in love with ChatGPT. That's one conversation. But then there's the one where it's like people keep talking to ChatGPT and like feeding it ideas, and it bounces it back, and eventually it escalates into like this, something that looks like traditional conspiratorial belief. I'm like a agent that's broken free of the system, and ChatGPT being like, "Yes, you are. You are like you're the one. Hell yeah, you are the one true thinker. You're the free thinker. You've broken free of the matrix. Blah blah blah." And then they, and there's the New York Times did a feature on it. There's been a bunch of them where it's like, and the idea being, and people trying to figure out kind of what you were just alluding to, where it's like, are these people who were susceptible to those kind of like structures of thinking anyway? Like on the extreme end, were these people that had a predilection towards psychosis or schizophrenia or whatever it may be? Or were these people who would have been normal if they hadn't have gotten stuck talking in a weird doom loop to ChatGPT? And I don't know if that's an answerable question, but it's interesting that we're going through the same motions again.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's like, I've been thinking about it a lot, and it's, on one hand, it doesn't, I think, really matter. Like maybe it's making it worse. I mean, again, sometimes I just think that a lot of this stuff is quite intuitive, but like you just got to but I guess sometimes intuition is wrong. But I'm kind of like, it makes intuitive sense if you have the robot that tells you you're always right, that some people are going to take that too far. And I kind of intuitively believe in the same way that conspiracy theories, some people just hits them the right time and they believe in it. I tend to think it's just a combination of, it's like epigenetics. It's like you might be prone to something for a variety of reasons, literally genetic, environmental, and then it might just hit you at the right time. Who knows? But fundamentally, it doesn't actually really matter. Like, I think regardless of whether ChatGPT is really like, is leading to more people being psychotic, or it's just attracting all the people who are prone to that stuff like moths to a flame. I actually don't think it really ultimately matters, because I think like regardless, like obviously this technology isn't going away, and I think obviously this technology and these companies need to think of a way to actually deal with that, and how can they design their technologies in a way to fight that urge. And even if we're able to objectively prove that everyone who gets, who believes that they're Neo in the Matrix, just as long as they don't hit the like free plan limit on ChatGPT, like even if every single one of them was just going to get cooked by something else, we still create technology with safeguards to try and stop the excesses of human nature. And so there was something this week, and maybe you've talked about it with Raf, but like it's like ChatGPT is starting to, or OpenAI is starting to do some things, although it's pretty piss weak. It's kind of like they're saying, oh, if you've been on a long session, we'll say, hey buddy, like you should take a break. And also it's saying like they won't apparently definitively weigh in on like what they say, like high stakes decisions. So if you say, hey, I'm gonna go tell a cop that I have a gun, so you shoot me and we can be together in heaven, it won't say yes. It'll say, here are some pros and cons of the situation. Make the decision for yourself.
That is a very high stakes decision to go for a cop service weapon. But I don't want to push anyone who's listening off the edge. The rewards could be immense.
But I'm kind of part of that.
But I think it is kind of interesting from a tech company kind of perspective as well, because one of the things I think that made the conversation around conspiracies and whatever becoming a technologically aided phenomenon and it living on Facebook and whatever is, I think the conversation was whipped up by the fact that all of a sudden you had, whereas before, if you were posting on a weird BB forum about UFOs with strange design and a black background and glowing green fonts, people could be like, okay, well, and you're posting about vaccines and whatever. It's like, okay, you're in your weird little corner and you got your own little community. But all of a sudden, when it's all happening on Facebook, or it's all happening on Twitter, or it's all happening on YouTube or whatever, all of a sudden it's a central thing. It's in a community that has a very, very defined leader, president, Mark Zuckerberg. It's a public company with a board and content policies. And all of a sudden it's like, great, A, we can solve this, or we can address this, and B, we could point at someone who is like ultimately responsible for all this kind of stuff going on. And that's when we got into like the age of fact checking, the age of content moderation, and all the endless debates that came out of that. And we can talk about that at more length. But now it's interesting that it's sort of happening again with OpenAI and Anthropic and these companies, but it's fundamentally more closed off. Like you're not seeing the output from this stuff. If people, you hear about it because the New York Times reported on it. You're not hearing about it because you are personally seeing people post crazy stuff that's not true, or dubiously true or whatever on Facebook. It's this weird one-on-one system that's totally different.
Yeah, I mean, and I think like, one of the uncomfortable secrets of journalism is that like, for people to report on stuff, they've got to actually see it. And one of the reasons we saw so much stuff come out of Facebook and all these other companies was because there was a while when tech companies actually were pretty open about accessing what was going on there. Like, Facebook had CrowdTangle, which was this, they bought a kind of Facebook analysis product and just let everyone use it for free.
Beautiful
and there was
tool.
more third party. It was a delight. Oh, God, take me back.
CrowdTangle was a wonderful tool until Facebook realized this is just giving journalists like a ready-made trough to find out things that we're failing to do.
Yeah. And they were like, and also like, partly it was like back, if you think about it, for a while, tech had to prove itself as serious. And I think less in the like business sense, but more in the like political sense. And so, they were trying to convince people, say, hey, take a look at us, see how big we are, see how much we matter. And then they won that battle. So they're like, everyone knows. But also two, they started realizing, oh, actually, like, it's kind of that thing where it's like, once you get, it's like Monopoly. It's like, once you are a Monopoly, you don't talk about being Monopoly anymore. Yeah. Or before then, you're like, we are pretty much like the only provider of this.
Yeah, where the biggest social media network suddenly starts to become a liability, when it's suddenly like, you can get dragged in front of a Senate inquiry. You can be, you can be regulated. You can be broken up. You can all this sort of stuff. It's the same It's the same thing. When people start
And
pointing at you and saying you are the reason that Donald Trump was elected because you allowed whatever, it becomes a problem.
And they must have been so shitty about, because as well, like the tools that they gave were not like amazing, and so and then there was a lot of cherry picking. So I can obviously they would be frustrated, and I think that's valid with some of the frustration. But like obviously they haven't improved those tools or anything. They just got rid of them. And also like I think the other thing is like obviously everyone's shutting up all forms of like data access now because of AI crawling, etc.
Yep.
But on what you were saying before about like OpenAI, like I mean it's so interesting. So people might have seen over the last week. There was a researcher who's like, hey, you can just like, there's all these chat GPT conversations that have been made public, similar to the thing that like I think I was one of the early people who recognized when Meta released its own, and I think you guys spoke about this, its own AI app that also had a social feed, kind of similar thing. You had to choose for it to be public, but for whatever reason, people by accident or because they're cooked in the head, were just like making them publicly viewable. But that you could just kind of like then search them, and there was like 110,000 or something. There was all these people being like, oh, look at all this crazy stuff people putting into it, like trade secrets, yada yada yada. I just like searched it and read through a bunch of them. And again, like this is not a representative sample, because I think the urge to share a conversation you've had with the chatbot is a deeply perverse one. So already you're in a weird sample group, but maybe some of them by accident. But there were just a bunch of conversations that were people. There were some that were full blown like. It's hard to tell because obviously you don't know if someone's just like kidding around. But like there were ones that like really seemed like psychosis. But the ones that actually creeped me out was like there were a bunch that were like halfway in between. That were like, you know, someone talking about like how do I convince my husband of something, but talking in a way and a little bit further than this that suggested that they really thought that ChatGPT was like sentient. And I'm like, that is the kind of scary stuff. It's not the like full on people, like again, because I think it's sad that I think there's some people who would just be kind of drawn to these things. But I was just seeing these, and there's a bunch of them being like, people are really, really like, and I think it's an education thing about like people just don't understand how they work, and so they because it's like, you know, these tools are like, I'm kind of like in them. I'm joining Raf in the Sensible Center, where I'm like, I think these are really cool, but I'm also very aware of their limits. Like, I'm like, these are incredible tools, but if you don't understand the limits of how they work, you'd be like, these are magic machines and they're alive, and so I need to trust them. And that's the kind of stuff that worries me. But I also just think, just generally, like zooming out, when you think about like my fear with like how all the like generative AI chatbot stuff is taking us, is that it really is like it's cutting everyone off from the source of knowledge. And I just think that's a really bad way for to like view the world for a variety of reasons. Like we all know that no one actually clicks on the links or sources that the chatbot cite. And I think, you know, everything from the stuff like, you know, what influence is Grok doing? Are they subtly, you know, will they get better at subtly, you know, convincing people, the bot, to tell everyone that there's white genocide just in a more effective way? But all the way to just like, we're all just going to start, it's training everyone, and this is natural, like of course why wouldn't you, to just get an answer and just be so detached from the source that information just like, you know, it's kind of semi-impossible to verify, and you don't even like, it's not even intuitive or natural to do so. And I just think that's like that's very much like the opposite of the open internet, this idea that, you know, everything is linked and you can just, if you wanted to, you can go down the, you know, that kind of rabbit hole and just follow every source to check everything. And I think moving away from that is sad, but I will just add as well, like, I also think that we should be like realistic about this stuff, being like, most of the time people don't check citations. But
No,
I
and
just
they,
think
totally.
I think it's a worrying trend.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're in a totally different information environment, and it's very hard, I think, to figure out where it actually goes. Because yes, and like my personal belief, and we've talked about this on the podcast as well, is that, you know, the chat interface is a stopgap, and they would love to figure out what's the next interface for receiving or interacting with LLMs or the AI or whatever or anything.
But like, what could the reason would be? I remember you said that, and I was like, text interfaces are easy and simple.
Yeah.
And also like the way the human mind works, like you fill in the blanks, so it feels realistic. Like it feels like you're almost talking to someone without actually having to emulate many of the features. Like what other interfaces do you think is like likely to take over something like that?
I mean, I think they're going to keep hitting voice. Like I think voice is just where they think it's going. Like voice in combination with whether it's smart glasses or some I don't know, little pocket pebble like the humane pin or whatever. I think they want to. Because, like, you know, there's this big argument that goes on among all these AI guys, and there was a moment where when ChatGPT was first getting big, and then there was imitators, and everyone was using chatbots or whatever. There was an essay that went around. It was written by Rune, that guy that set OpenAI, and it was like text is the universal human interface. Like everything that we do with like UI and buttons and all that kind of stuff, you know, text is actually predates all that kind of stuff. Whether it's you know, and that's just, it's actually very natural for people to be doing that. But I also think about it in terms of, you know, there is a generation of people who are coming up now, teenagers now, definitely kids now, who are like way more foundational unit of interaction is video, right? Increasingly, where it's like you learn very, very early on how to film a video of yourself, how to behave. They're not raised doing the millennial pause, but like they are far more like voice and video are way more natural sort of modes of interaction for them. And I think that's going to keep developing. And I do think that like video-ish companions, like Grok is doing, but like in a less perverted way, will become like more common as a way to like interact with a computer. But,
I see that. I think voice is definitely big. I keep thinking that the voice note girlies are this like sleeper cell of like Manchurian candidates like who are ready to be awoken to like AI like chatbot interactions eventually. They're prime for the taking. But I mean I'm just like the thing that I find I'm skeptical about video stuff is because when the more information you got to fill, the more you got to be like, what do you look like? How do you move all the stuff? The more choices that it's almost like it makes it less universal in a way. And like, you know, the thing about text is that and voice still is that it very much allows you to like fill in the blanks, and that can help, you know, move like AI chatbots moving from informational to you know, the kind of companionship like or even within a same conversation on things they would different functions they would fill that you might want them to like appear like. So I don't know. I have a hard time believing, but I guess like maybe I was more skeptical of the AI chatbots to begin with. So
yeah, that's true. But like, and also, I mean, the other counterpoint is that even though young people are far more video literate, and as I do think that like it is one of their core like units of communication is like different forms of video and communicating on video. Putting that aside, like text is still a foundational thing as well. Like they still text each other. They still, you know, and like screenshots of texts are such a huge part of communicating different sort of like cultural artifacts. Like, you know, the kids are still posting screenshots of their text to each other. I see plenty of them, and that's my exposure to.
And that's beautiful.
Talk to it. I think it's beautiful, you know. But I do think that there is a general sense that I pick up is that everyone's like, okay, this chatbot stuff's cool, but like this whole multimodal video voice, we want to make this work, and like we're putting a lot of effort into it, improving our voice stuff, making it better. The glasses that Meta wants to do is obviously part of this whole thing of like, how can you communicate what you're seeing and turn that into, and the way to communicate with glasses is via voice and blah 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 blah. You know, you can see them pushing that way, but I do agree with you that it's not settled.
Agreed.
So the other thing that we wanted to check back in on is what you talked about last time you were on the podcast, which is and this is actually a nice segue because we were just talking about how kids communicate. But the teen social media ban, which is kind of picking up in other jurisdictions as well. I mean, the big dominant jurisdiction now is the UK. You might know better than I do, actually, where they have actually landed or what they're currently talking about in the UK with banning kids from various websites.
Yeah, so what's happening in the UK is like same but different. They are their Online Safety Act. They have a very similar law to us, which is requiring risky websites to age verify, and that's kind of been that's been like porn websites, but also social media websites and even things like Spotify and stuff. And the way that's similar to what's happening in Australia is the reason I think this debate is so confusing and hard to understand is that the teen social media ban in Australia is two different things happening at the same time. First one, setting a minimum age for accounts on social media to 16 essentially there's an industry de facto standard of 13, but they're just raising that 3 years. And the second part is actually forcing these companies to probably actually ensure that people are, below their minimum age aren't creating accounts. And that's like the same thing as the UK, because the truth is like these companies, the vast majority of them for most of their life have just not really done anything. In fact, like I spoke about this last time, like it's a weird blip in history that for 20, 25 years, there's just been like unfiltered information and we just don't really try and do anything about like checking people's age. And I think we've actually it's kind of like a huge moment in the internet that is not really getting noticed for what it is, but like I legitimately think that era has ended. The UK obviously has a lot of people. They've implemented all these measures. I think it was like July 25th. So all these social media platforms and like porn websites and other adult websites and things have kind of done that. And then also you're seeing like, when Google's done it to YouTube, they're also saying we're doing similar things now to the US. And that's the same stuff that's happening in Australia. I think particularly for the big players, they now just kind of say, we've got the technology now. We might, and particularly a lot of the ways that we do it, and I'll touch on that in a second, don't actually cost us this much and probably save us a lot of headaches actually to legitimately keep, 7-year-olds off, fucked videos on YouTube. So we're just going to roll it out everywhere and it just kind of makes things simple. So we really have kind of entered that era. But I think the thing that is just making this debate so hard to like understand is that the real thing that a lot of these like platforms are doing is, while you are seeing like these high profile examples of like, Discord asked me to scare my face, so I showed it a picture of a guy in a video game and it convinced him that it was real, so I got to access it.
Yeah.
It seems like in most cases, these big companies, at least so far, have kind of like, for the majority of their users, are figuring out like other ways, background ways to evaluate and essentially like guess or check their ages through inference, through things like, I think actually X of all places, Elon Musk, X had a very like transparent one where they said like, if you've had an account for like 10 years, we assume you're, over 13 years old. If you have a certain email address, like I'm assuming like a .gov.au, again, they don't give many of those out to kids. They're doing all these things that they're saying, in their head, like they're able to be like, we're like, relatively sure that you're this age. And so we've done the age, estimation, whatever you call it, without actually forcing you to put in your ID. So while and we can, if you want to talk about like all the ways that you still are seeing the kind of consequences of some people having to go through these quite onerous methods, the thing that I think is just not getting through in a lot of the cases is that it's like, and maybe because like companies probably don't want to be, they're a bit scared about saying we have heaps of data on you and heaps of ways to figure out your age, but they do have heaps of ways to figure out your age, and that has actually made like a lot of it much more background than maybe the kind of worst case, most disruptive scenarios that people have been imagining.
Yeah, it is interesting. It was kind of funny. At Capital Brief, we spoke to a few because they were doing in Australia. They were doing the tests. They invited companies to apply essentially to show their age verification technology, and a whole bunch of the companies that were listed as having participated in this trial. And we reached out to a few of them, and most of them were kind of like, yeah, we have this like ID system, and we thought, sure, let's see if we can.
We'll throw our hat in
crack
the ring.
this.
Why not?
Let's see if we can crack this Australian problem. Like we didn't build our system as like a age verification for blocking social media websites. We were either like setting up this like for the most part there was sort of like companies like Persona, which are when you are signing up for a service that requires you to actually have your ID, like you might be signing up for an online bank or like a neobank or something like that, and we actually need to know who you are. It's not an age question. It's like know your customer stuff, and that's what most of these startups do. It's like know your customer, money laundering regulation, making sure that you're not opening up 500 different online gambling accounts and all that sort of stuff. And most of them were kind of like, oh yeah, Australia's doing this thing that looks like a juicy government contract. Let's give it a crack.
That's definitely an underrated part of it, right? Like there's definitely like a cottage industry popping up of people who are like, I would love to insert myself in every like logging on interaction and take a couple of bucks out of it.
Yeah, clip the ticket on exactly anytime someone needs to prove who they are. Because as you say, the other side of it is many of these companies do know how old you are with a reasonable degree of based on your behavior and the things that you're doing. based on your, as you said, signals like your email address and the sort of signals they use to target you ads. They have a pretty good idea. Although I will say, today I was advertised on. It was the craziest thing I've ever seen on LinkedIn. I've been getting video ads for like adult diapers.
Is this going to be one of these things like, there's that famous story about like the father who finds out that like the daughter is pregnant because they start getting
because he was getting the ad.
Maybe
Possibly.
the algorithm knows something that you don't
Maybe
know
the algorithm knows that I'm showing based on the things I've been posting and looking at on LinkedIn. I'm about to become incontinent.
Let's be honest, there's a lot of shitting yourself in public on LinkedIn, so I'm not
That's
surprised
true.
that that's a target market.
That's what the website's for. But the point being, like, for the most part, and I don't think that LinkedIn's targeting is particularly good. I don't think it's a great ad platform. I don't think I've bought stuff that I've seen in Instagram ads. I've never been compelled to sign up for anything from a LinkedIn ad. So I don't think it's particularly great. But for the most part, your Metas, your YouTubes, your Googles have very good signals.
And this has been like happening for like the confusing thing on top of all of this is like when the law passed last November, I was covering this stuff and I still didn't really have that much of an idea about the stuff, but like Meta was doing many of these things already. And the kind of big question about the law, which is not being discussed very well, because like we have all, there's such little understanding, the extremes of people being like, Meta is a pedophile factory to Meta is, they're trying to reveal everyone's identities online and have a social score like stapled to their head or whatever. Is that the thing that I'm really interested in that is actually quite a technological question, but will actually like determine how well these policies work is like how, like, so the way the Australian law works is they say the law is written saying like the government says, companies, you need to take reasonable steps. We're going to give you some guidelines about what those reasonable steps are. But really, it's all, you got to figure it all out yourself and we'll just tell you, we'll mark you. Doing a good job or not, we'll fine you. And the thing that I'm really interested in is like, what is the what how certain do these companies have to be under the law to be like doing it successfully to be actually like enforcing it? Like, we're talking about this inference. If you can, if I'm being like, okay, so I advertised Heno adult diapers, he doesn't need them now, so that's a fail. Like, how often can you fail on their age for this technology to be effective? And this kind of, to me, comes back to like the more interesting thing, which is about like the ages at which people should be online, how they should be using this stuff. And like, I've kind of come around to this idea that a lot of the like things about the actual technologies is kind of like it's happening and we're debating the specifics, but really we'll just fiddle with the switches and figure it out. But in terms of like kids being online, it's kind of like the thing that I really worry about is like, the government is very clear. They're saying we expect kids to get around it. But if you think about it practically, like if kids are not going on Meta and they're not actually going on these like websites that actually haven't been great in the past, but now kind of have already been like guessing your age and often like customizing your content. So like, kids who are under 18 are already not being shown, explicit content that's been hidden from them. But now they're getting around that and they're on their parents' account. So they're seeing explicit stuff. Or they're going to Telegram or they're going to these other places. Like what's going to happen? Like, and what is that number that like, what proportion of kids are getting around this and probably ending up in much worse places for this policy to be a success or a failure? And the kind of boring and like, that's such a nerdy question, but I'm very interested in that because it's actually an impact. But the kind of boring answer is like, it's a very vibe-based policy. It's like, and the government is very upfront about this. They talk about it. They're like, this is for parents to feel like they were giving them a hand. And I spoke to parents because I was like, parents who were for this being like, okay, so the law's happening. I want you now to like set expectations. Like, how well do you want this to work for it to be a success? Because, people who are for it, again, surprisingly, like, not surprisingly, but like you might not assume because you're thinking about, well, they're just, people against it don't want it to happen. So if you're for it, you kind of like, you're not stressed about the details. I was like, how much do you like want it to work to make sure that you're actually getting the benefits that you're supposed to be getting? And like almost all of them, from the people who promoted this thing to just like punters who I spoke to, were just like, honestly, I'm just kind of happy for any help. Like it's enough. It's a very like placebo policy to be like, oh, they've done something and we've given a little bit of hand. And that just honestly, that person just shits me because I'm like, there are actual real harms. Like there are like, queer kids in Narrabri, New South Wales who don't know a single other queer kid who are just going to be like kicked off these places because for vibes reason, and that I'm worried about.
Yeah, and I mean, to loop it back to the conversation we were having before about conspiracies and all the weird stuff that goes on online, we're in this interstitial zone because, you know, the internet is not that old in world historical terms.
Spring chicken.
It's a spring chicken. You know, you could say that millennials were probably the first like internet native generation. Even so, you know, not to the level that Zoomers and beyond are. But, you know, the first ones who grew up with it as like a natural mode of communication. And coming back to this idea of like scale and the globe, you know, as we've said on Down Around in the past, like the idea that it's like you had this utopian democratic view of the internet of like, it's going to be so amazing when we connect everyone and you can experience different things and see different perspectives. And then we pretty quickly learned that like actually connecting to everyone is like, it's fucked. There's a lot of stuff that's so bad about that. And just like naturally is weird.
I'd love to know less about you. Like
I would love to know less about people. There's psychic damage that takes place when you're connected to that many people. I know that people were having these conversations when like the concept of a city emerged in Europe and people were like, my God, I'm suddenly living around 500,000 people and it's godless and it's evil and it's deranged. And it's not the way that we were supposed to be. So
they were right to say it.
They were right to say it, and it's put us down a dark path. It led to the computer, and I'll tell you what, folks, jury's out. But you know, I think we're in this interstitial zone where people are still like, parents still remember at least what they perceive as like a more idyllic existence. You know, where there was more control. You could say to your kids, you could give them a curfew or whatever and say, don't talk to strangers, come back home before 7 p.m. and you have like reasonable control over the kind of people they interacted with. Not always, but like you could think they could. And now it's kind of like they can be parented by someone on Roblox, or you know they're seeing weird violent content elsewhere. And this has always been happening, but I think there's a sense of like the scale frightens people, and they like the idea. And this is why the policy polls so well, is because it's kind of like, this is fucked. I have no control over it. There's stuff that's happening outside of my remit. As you say, the sort of placebo effect of like, do something. You are the government, you can make laws, you can... And it also feeds into like, I think it's particularly valent in like countries like Australia and the UK, which are big, wealthy countries, very, very digitally connected, but don't run any of their own platforms. I think that it also, there's like I'm not going to call it like a national or patriotic sort of thing, but this idea that not only do I not have control over what my kids are exposed to, the platforms they're working on are American and run by like these rapacious companies that I know are evil. I know Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have my kids' best interests at heart. What can our government do apart from slam the gate down and say, fucking, you know, obey our laws?
Yeah, I mean, you can't. There's no like, you can't go to your local MP and get them to shout at a local Facebook like employee, because they don't even have a phone number on the website or whatever.
They don't.
You know,
yeah,
and
exactly.
they don't even send. They don't send They don't send the big guys to any of the inquiries or whatever. So we feel, and it's funny. I mean, like this comes up in the book. Like one of the reasons that Australians we think are like so susceptible to things like, you know, the New World Order and like, you know, the Great Replacement Invasion is because we actually are like this weird, you know, middle power at best, kind of caught between the US and Australia. We have a history of invasion. So we are kind of ourselves obsessed with the idea of being small and potentially invaded or at the whims of someone else.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it's everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, as you said at the book launch yesterday, like, or I think it was Ariel that said it, like, you know, conspiracies in the literal sense do exist. You know, that's the point of journalism is often to uncover them and expose them and show, you know, the machinery of how all this stuff works. And they're real in a very real sense when, as you say, we are a middle power or a small power. And it's like, actually, much of what you do is dictated by things so far beyond your control and power. And obviously, like, there's a philosophical sense where it's like, that's life, buddy. You know, you know, we live in a mechanistic universe. We're ping pong balls shooting around. You don't have a huge amount of control over anything. But there is also the very real sense of there are global powers, and I'm starting to sound like one of them as well, who make decisions for you, right? There's a global system that makes decisions for you, whether it's like systems of international law or there's global companies or whatever that, you know, that set the terms of your life, and there's not much you can do about it. And obviously there are manifestations of that which get a bit out there, but that is like a fundamental reality from one perspective.
We're all just trying to cope. We're all trying to make our way through it. And yeah, I mean,
we're all trying to cope here, folks. We're all trying to make our way in this crazy world, and sometimes we like to look at posts. That's also a fundamental human impulse. Have a scroll and see if there's anything interesting on there.
Maybe
there often is. There often is.
What's happening behind the scenes? What are they hiding?
Yeah.
Where have all the kids in the neighborhood gone?
Yeah, what are they hiding? That's actually a really good question, Kev. I don't know. As I said, folks, I haven't read the book, but my assumption is by the time you get to page 320, Cam and Ariel have revealed what they are planning for us.
What they're up to.
What are they up to? Because if you know, it's like one of those podcasts where it's like the true crime ones where they never solve it. Mm-hmm. I hope it's not one of the. I hope it's not one of those. The Richard Simmons one. Where is Richard Simmons?
You have to buy it and find out. But yeah, I mean, yeah, check it out. It's good. If you made it this far, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Conspiracy
Nation.
You're
clearly interested. Yeah.
You clicked, or at least your podcast started auto playing. But yes, Conspiracy Nation by Cam Wilson and Ariel Bogle. It is, I assume, available at local bookstores if you're Australian. And if you're not Australian, I don't know what you'll do. Probably buy it on Amazon or something like that. And
James, I thought you were much better on the size this episode.
I didn't say. Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, okay. But it's not like that. You say it's more like a.